Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for this webinar on clean cars and truck standards for New Mexico. We are really glad to see so many people logging in. So this is really great. We're honored to see a lot of our legislators here today and a lot of their district legislative aides, which is very exciting. We realized during the session that we had a lot of misunderstandings about what these rules were, how they functioned, how they came to be. And we realized that we did a lot of education and outreach for the Environmental Improvement Board and for the Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Air Quality Control Board, because that's where the rules were designed and adopted. And that was with 50 plus hours of expert testimony, cross-examination, rebuttal. And so we made our case and those rules were adopted, but we never got a chance to talk to our legislators about this process and these rules. So we are really glad that you're all here today. And on the next slide, we're going to show you who's here to talk to you today about these rules. We have three of our experts that actually did some of the expert witnessing at the EIB hearing. We have Kathy Harris, the Director of Clean Vehicles Program at NRDC. We have Aaron Kressig, the Transportation Electrification Manager at WRA, and Guillermo Ortiz, Senior Clean Vehicle Advocate for NRDC. And so they're going to quickly walk us through what they want us to know about these rules and how they became effective in New Mexico. And then at the end, we will ask any questions that you want and we'll get you answers. So please save questions until the end. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over now to Kathy to start the webinar. Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you so much, Tammy, and so great to see so many folks joining virtually today. I think we can probably skip to the next slide just because Tammy did a really great overview of why we're here today and want to highlight that there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end during this discussion and want to make sure that you all have the opportunity to ask anything that's on your mind. But before we get started on what the rules are and the history behind how they were adopted here in New Mexico, as well as just some background and misspelling, some misinformation that we've been hearing. I wanted to first highlight some news that we heard last week coming from the federal government. I know it's been very prevalent on news, so I just wanted to kind of set the stage of what's been happening at the federal level so that we can move forward in this webinar talking about kind of the benefits that these regulations do bring here to New Mexico. And I think also just putting in the frame that despite what's happening at the federal level, the federal actions just to me serve as a really strong reminder of the importance of state leadership and seeing states continue to want to drive progress forward and help improve air quality and health and as well as the climate to its residents. But on the federal level, what happened last week is that the Senate illegally used a process called the Congressional Review Act to revoke the waivers for California's latest clean cars and trucks programs. As to what that actually means, there's still a lot of uncertainty given this is a really unprecedented attack in the over 50 plus years of history that California has been granted these waivers of preemption under the Clean Air Act. So we're still trying to figure out exactly what that means, but I know California and Governor Newsom immediately after that vote announced plans to sue over this decision. So we'll still continue to kind of track and see what that means for New Mexico as well as the Section 177 states. But as I said, I think that this is really the moment for states to continue to show leadership and a commitment to clean air and healthy communities and a clean climate. And we saw that actually on Friday, right after the vote, that 11 states, including Governor Lujan Grisham and New Mexico, joined a coalition called the Affordable Clean Cars Coalition, which has a variety of different goals in mind, but one of them being a commitment to continue progress to meeting the goals of states' clean vehicle programs, which was really exciting to see. And again, I think shows the commitment and the importance of state leadership in this time of federal uncertainty. I did also want to mention, there's a lot of federal incentives right now for electric vehicles as well as charging stations. New Mexico, as we'll hear in a little bit, has also made really great progress on providing incentives to remove some of the barriers towards initial adoption of vehicles. But we are seeing attempted rollbacks at the federal level to remove some of those federal fundings for EVs as well as charging stations. But a couple weeks ago, 17 states, including New Mexico again, have sued over some of these charging station incentives to ensure that we can continue to see the build out of those under the NEVI formula funding. And I should say a bunch of environmental NGOs, including NRDC, just also intervened in that case to help support states' abilities to implement the funding that they were promised to help us build out a robust network of charging infrastructure here in New Mexico. So that's where we're at the federal level. But again, just to reiterate, and as we're thinking about this throughout this presentation, about the importance of these standards as well as complementary policies, is that now is really the time for states to show the leadership and step up when we know that the federal government unfortunately seems to not be moving forward on the progress that we need to help clean up our air and our transportation system. So with that preamble, I will pass it over to Guillermo to give us a little bit more of an update about the history of the standards that we're here to speak about today, as well as the Clean Trucks program.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I appreciate it. And here I want to start us off with how these standards were adopted. So what you see in front of you is a simplified timeline of kind of how these standards were adopted. So there was a petition process with the opportunity for testimony and to become a party. And as was mentioned, Aaron, Kathy, and I, amongst others, were a part of the expert witnesses as part of this proceeding. In that process, there was analysis provided by the state and third-party modelers meant to demonstrate the economic, climate, and public health benefits for New Mexico. In particular, as a result of this process, there were hundreds of written comments and oral comments given throughout the week, totaling over 50 hours in terms of public hearings in November of 2023. This included testimony from doctors, from tribal members, impacted community members, environmental justice groups, auto manufacturers, auto dealers, and environmental groups. It's important to note that on the clean truck standards, there was no opposition to the standards. So the hearing in terms of opposition parties focused on the clean cars rules. Next slide, please. And so, what's the need for these clean car and clean truck standards? In particular, it's the transportation emissions. Here, transportation is the second largest source of climate change emissions in New Mexico. Air pollution from both the light and medium and heavy duty vehicles harm lower income individuals and communities of color the most. And in particular, high fuel and vehicle upkeep of internal combustion engine vehicles is a financial burden especially for lower income families. And what we have here from pollution from these cars and trucks really threatening New Mexico's water supplies, ecosystems, and people. So there's an urgent need to address these emissions in particular. Next slide, please. So the benefits of these rules in terms of looking at some of the analyses that came out of this process was that altogether, the Advanced Clean Cars 2, Advanced Clean Trucks, and Heavy Duty Omnibus would reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 139 million metric tons. And this is more than the entire state of New Mexico emitted in 2018. It would save consumers $35 billion in terms of fuel and maintenance costs, including delivering $48 billion in net societal benefits. It improves customer choice, allows customers the ability to get the EVs they want, whether that's in the light duty or in the medium and heavy duty market. And in particular, as was dictated and found in the American Lung Association's report, Driving to Clean Air, it will result in 194 fewer deaths and 2.1 billion in public health benefits across New Mexico by 2050. So an incredible amount of benefits spanning from climate change to air quality to economic benefits as well. Next slide, please. And that brings us to the Clean Trucks rules. Next slide. The Advanced Clean Trucks Rule, or ACT, is a standard meant to that applies to manufacturers of medium and heavy duty vehicles. So these are everything from your heavier pickup trucks all the way to those semi trucks that you see on the highways. What this rule does, it requires manufacturers to increase the number of electric trucks that they produce and buses over time, capping out in 2035. It's important to note with ACT that the total percentage of electric vehicles that would have to be produced ranges between 40 to 75%, depending on the vehicle class in the medium and heavy duty sector. It also ACT also collects important fleet characteristic and operational data to better understand how fleets are operating within the state, and it allows for multiple ways to comply. It relies on a deficit and credit generation system, allowing for credits to be generated early, to be banked and traded amongst the manufacturers. All of this helps to make implementation easier, cheaper, and more efficient. Next slide, please. And this brings us to the heavy duty omnibus, or HDO, standard. What this regulation does is it strengthens emission standards for gas and diesel heavy duty trucks, establishing a nitrous oxide emission limit that is 90% more stringent than what is currently standard. It also sets new, longer warranty periods for emission control systems and includes other improvements to aspects of emission regulations, including new low load certification cycles and improved in-use testing. This would take effect in model year 2027 in New Mexico. Next slide. And in particular, altogether, what we're talking about is really delivering on public health, climate, and economic benefits. Like we said before, some of the modeling that we were able to provide during this process indicated that this would result in 51 reduced premature deaths, 28,000 less cases of respiratory illnesses through 2050, as well as cutting down the emissions from the heavy-duty fleet in New Mexico by 39%. It also will, as I mentioned before, reduce fuel costs and maintenance costs, stimulating jobs in New Mexico, as well as stimulating investment in the infrastructure needed to power these vehicles. Next slide. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Kathy, to talk about the Clean Car Regulation.
Thank you, Guillermo. So the other component regulation that New Mexico has adopted is called the Advanced Clean Cars 2, or ACC2 program. So I wanted to give a little bit of background similar to what Guillermo gave on the truck side about what these regulations are. So this is a requirement that applies to vehicle manufacturers, not dealerships or customers that sell new vehicles. So no used dealerships are included in this, or no, it's only on those new vehicle manufacturers. So it has no effect on the used market. What it does is that it sets requirements on automakers to do two things. One, sell an increasing number of new, clean, zero-emission vehicles in New Mexico each year, increasing that percentage over time to help provide a planned phase approach towards this transition to cleaner, zero-emission vehicles. But it also has an important component called the low-emission vehicle standards, which are actually standards to help reduce tailpipe emissions from gasoline and diesel passenger cars. So while the truck side that Guillermo was talking about is more of those larger step vans, heavier duty tractor trailers, and things like that, the clean car standards are very specifically focused on passenger vehicles. So it helps to not only help to increase the number of different cleaner zero-emission vehicles available for sale in New Mexico, but also make sure that the gasoline and diesel passenger cars that are on our roads are polluting less toxic NOx and particular emissions throughout the course of these programs as well. So what all that means practically, if you go to the next slide, is that this provides significant benefits to New Mexico. I always call it a quadruple win. It not only helps to reduce emissions from climate harming pollutants, but it also helps to improve air quality, improve health, and importantly, as this slide shows, helps to improve drivers' wallets by reducing costs. So what this slide shows is that over the course of these types of this program, we're going to see that drivers will ultimately be able to save around $14,000 to $16,000 over the life of the vehicle. By adopting these programs, and that comes from fueling costs, maintenance costs, et cetera. But ultimately, drivers will see a positive benefit from this transition to cleaner zero emission vehicles. And if you go to the next slide, as I mentioned, there's also significant climate benefits associated with these types of rules too. So the gray line on the top there is if these regulations were not in place, what we could see the types of emissions coming from in New Mexico through 2050. The next two lines are dependent on, the year that the program ends. New Mexico has chosen to end the program in 2032. So that's that green line, which still shows significant reduction in greenhouse gas emissions through 2050, especially compared to that baseline requirement. So again, these regulations are something that Aaron will talk about in a minute about they're very feasible to achieve and really help us have that planned phase approach to this transition that we know is coming as we were seeing across the globe. But really what this does is that it helps to, tackle the climate crisis through reduce greenhouse gas emissions, helps improve drivers' costs, and helps tackle poor air quality and the effects of human health on from that poor air quality. So with that, I will turn it over to Aaron to dive a little bit deeper into some of these misconceptions we've been hearing at the state level. Aaron, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. So with that important context from Guillermo and Kathy, next we're going to talk about what has happened since the clean car and truck rules were adopted in 2023. Next slide, please. And the short answer is quite a lot has happened, and much of that is due to leadership from the legislature. Since putting these policies in place, New Mexico has worked diligently to secure a handful of complementary policies: the Clean Fuel Standard, another round of utility transportation electrification plans, state tax credits for used and new EVs, and most recently, the Clean Community Benefit Fund. These policies and other state leadership actions have begun to create a very positive environment for electric vehicles in New Mexico. The clean car and truck rules are crucial to drive the market forward, but supporting policies such as these make it easier to purchase and fuel your zero emission vehicle. Next slide. A lot of the time we hear people talk about how there aren't enough chargers out there. And look, we do need to continue to build more chargers, but that is exactly what New Mexico is doing, as you can see here. The state has seen massive growth in charger rollout since 2020, which is a testament to many things, but certainly strong partnership from the electric utilities and leadership from the New Mexico Department of Transportation. Next slide. So next we're going to talk about dispelling myths and misconceptions that we heard come up during the 2025 legislative session when several anti-clean car and truck bills floated through the Roundhouse. Some of these are similar to what we hear in other states and around the country, but I actually went back and listened through some of those hearing recordings where the bills were discussed to pick up on exactly what was being said. So you'll see that reflected here. The first one for you is that gas vehicles are not available in clean car states. This is one we heard come up in the original hearing in 2023, in the motion to stay hearing in 2024, and again in the 2025 legislative session. And it remains as untrue today as it was in those times. And I will say this is a pretty easy one to dispel with a quick Google search. This originated from conversations around Stellantis dealerships. So just last week, I Googled Stellantis dealerships in the California Bay Area, an area you think EV adoption would be the highest. And you can pretty quickly see that they are still selling gas vehicles in those places. And that is because the rule simply does not require dealers to halt sales of new gas vehicles. That is not what this rule does over the course of the next decade. Next up, and I heard this one a couple of times in the hearing, which is alarming because it isn't true at all is that demand has increased by 1% from 2022 to 2024. Market share in New Mexico has doubled in the 3 years from Q1 2022 to Q1 of 2025, which is really quite remarkable growth. And on the next slide, we'll compile a longer list that kind of demonstrates that strong growth, which will be complete with like URL links to look up and verify yourself if you're interested. And the final one on this slide is that the rule can be altered to phase in for rural districts. I think this is an interesting idea, but it's not possible under the Clean Air Act, where regulations must be adopted statewide. However, it is true in a de facto sense that auto manufacturers' compliance obligations under this rule are met statewide. So if uptake of EVs is higher in Silver City than it is in Truth or Consequences, that's a-okay. The rule is flexible in this manner. Next slide. So quick detour from the myth-busting circuit to talk a bit about the EV market's growth. The conversation around how the EV market is proceeding is full of a lot of misinformation and I think is often also short-sighted. So I just wanted to bring some information to bear, again, replete with citations. First of all, the New Mexico EV market is continuing on a pathway of impressive growth. The EV market in New Mexico has grown every year over the last decade, and 2024 was no exception. 2025 started off on another strong note with Q1 of 2025 showing around 19% growth compared to Q1 of 2024. And the US market has also continued to show strong growth in 2024 and early 2025. This comes even as longtime EV market dominator Tesla has been rapidly losing its market share control to more traditional OEMs like GM, Ford, and Hyundai. The market is not only growing, but diversifying, and market pundits expect that growth to continue. Final point on the EV market, which I think is so crucial to remember, is that the auto industry is a global market, not just a national one. And the world is making a rapid transition to EVs, already far surpassing the US in terms of market share. The global portion of EVs was 20% of new sales in 2024, which marked a 25% growth year over year compared to 2023. And market forecasters are projecting similar growth in 2025 and the accomplishment of 1/4 of all new vehicles being sold globally in the year of 2025 being electric. You'll find no question with market forecasters on the direction of the global auto market. It is towards zero-emission vehicles. And the question is how far the US and its states like New Mexico will be, how far behind they will be as compared to the rest of the world. Next slide. Okay, so going through some more things that came up in the session. This one comes up quite a bit as well, which is that the rule will require 43% of all new vehicles to be ZEVs in 2027. And I will admit that the crediting nature of this rule, it can be a bit confusing, but it is simply not true that this percentage of vehicles will need to be ZEV starting in 2027. Saying this ignores the flexibilities that are an integral part of the rule, which all automakers will be using. And I'll elaborate on this a bit more in the next slide. Another common misnomer we hear is that there are no electric trucks, and that will make it challenging in the rural parts of the state. This is not true. There are many all-electric trucks available today, including the Ford F-150 Lightning, the Chevy Silverado EV, the Rivian R1T, the Tesla Cybertruck, the GMC Hummer EV pickup, and the GMC Sierra EV. And there are many more coming down the pipe. Finally, for this slide, a claim that came up a few times in the legislative session was that auto dealers are suffering greatly from this rule. This one is not possible because the rule has not entered into effect, and it won't until model year 2027. This came up in the motion to stay attempt in 2024, and it was not proven that the rule was causing irreparable harm. And I think finally, and most of the point is that, as Kathy mentioned earlier, this rule does not regulate New Mexico auto dealers. It is a rule that requires auto manufacturers, your Fords and GMs and Hyundais, to bring a larger inventory of EVs to New Mexicans. Next slide. Now, I want to circle back on this point because I know it's a crucial one about the rule requiring 43% of new vehicles to be ZEVs in 2027. So I imagine your first reaction seeing this graph is like, whoa, this is a complicated graph. And that's fair. But that is also because this is a complicated rule. And that makes it easy for opponents of the rule to gloss over some of the complexities, which actually make it much easier for the automakers to comply with the requirements. I'm going to direct your attention to two separate things here. First off, you see a whole bunch of values listed on the right side of this graph. These are credits that auto manufacturers have at their disposal to comply with the requirements of the rule. These include pooling from other states, early action credits, and more. Auto manufacturers are going to use these credits because it makes it easier to comply with the rule. And the result of that is the black line, which you'll see titled Actual ZEVs and PHEVs Delivered. What I want you to notice is that in 2027, the actual amount that need to be delivered is well below 20%. And it stays below 40% through 2029. This graphic was created by the New Mexico Environment Department and was used in the 2023 proceeding. But just want to show that the way that the rule has been set up and the way the credits have been designed from the New Mexico Environment Department are intended to ease compliance in the early years of this rule. Next slide, please. So this is our final myth-busting slide here. Again, finishing up things that came up in the legislative session. This one has come up a ton, and that's the claim that this regulation will force customers to go out of state to purchase a gas vehicle. And I just want to say this one is entirely based on speculation. There are no real-world examples from New Mexico or any other state that's adopted this rule to suggest that New Mexicans will have to leave the state to purchase a gas vehicle. And I would say that it's just as likely that customers from other states like Arizona or Texas may come to New Mexico to get an all-electric vehicle that they may not be able to purchase in their home state. During the hearing, we heard lots of testimony from New Mexicans having to leave the state to buy an EV because the one they wanted wasn't available on their local dealer's lot. And another claim that came up a lot was that there was most of the public comment was in opposition. The opposite is true. I went through the transcripts from the hearing. 80 out of 100 of the testifiers were in support of this rule. And finally, and those are the public commenters, I should say. Finally, there is the last one. There's a claim that the policy will raise costs for New Mexicans. There were two economic analyses brought forth on the impact of these rules, one done by the state and one done by the consulting firm Energy Resources Management, or ERM. Both of these demonstrated massive benefits from the rules. And the biggest category of savings was reduced fuel and maintenance costs for the drivers of these vehicles. There's never been a quantitative analysis to demonstrate the rule would be negative for New Mexico's economy, but rather both that exist have demonstrated billions of dollars of savings from adoption of this rule and the Clean Trucks rule. Next slide, please. So I want to conclude our presentation with this point, which is that New Mexico should stand strong behind these critical environmental protections for many reasons. First of all, as has been demonstrated through the cost-benefit assessments, thousands of pages of testimony, more than a week's worth of hearing time, these policies deliver economic, environmental, and public health benefits to New Mexico. The policy is right for New Mexico, and we hope that will motivate keeping the policy in place at the state level. Secondly, and circling back to kind of the elephant in the room, the CRA move that Kathy mentioned, which happened last week, has been deemed invalid and illegal by many nonpartisan entities, and legal challenges are expected from the states that have adopted these rules. So what's going on there is certainly, the outcome is certainly uncertain. In the meantime, the Air Resources Board has announced since the CRA vote that it will continue to certify some vehicles under the Clean Car and Truck standards, indicating they intend to move forward with implementing this rule if possible. And importantly, I think, is the historical context, which is that clean car rules have withstood federal attacks in the past. The Trump administration tried to do away with Clean Cars 1 in their first term, and that effort was ultimately unsuccessful because the waiver was reinstated by the next administration. And that was in part because states kept those rules on their books, which is exactly what we're urging New Mexico to do in this instance. The potential that this rule may be fully reinstated by a future federal administration will motivate automakers to continue delivering the EVs to New Mexicans. From an environmental perspective, state rules are about to become even more important than ever as the federal administration is poised to weaken federal tailpipe standards. Protecting New Mexico's climate and public health falls more into the hands of its elected officials now than ever. The narrative from Washington may be more toxic than ever, but so too is the need to preserve a livable New Mexico for future generations and improve its air quality for the generations that are living here today. For all of these reasons, we believe the Clean Car and Truck standards continue to be crucial for New Mexico, and we're urging you to continue to support them. Next slide, please. So that concludes our slide deck, and I think I'm going to pass it back to Tammy to run the show.
Thank you, Aaron. All right, folks, that was a lot of information. We wanted to get through all the information so we had plenty of time for Q&A. So if you do have a question, please go down to the Q&A box and enter it there. A couple of you have already been texting me, so I'm going to start with a couple of questions that are not in the Q&A box now, but please go ahead and enter other questions. The question I've gotten, I think this is best for Kathy to answer, is around, we know that we have additional charging stations coming for light duty vehicles, but are we going to have enough by the time these rules start to be implemented to really make them work?
Yes. One of the things about charging infrastructure that I should also highlight is that unlike gas stations, if you have access to a garage, it's essentially like having access to a gas station in your home, where the use of public charging is really only needed for longer trips. Now, of course, I understand that not everybody has access to home charging, and so we do need this public charging, which is where these public investments and these private investments are really critical. But I think we've continued to see growth of these charging stations over time. And I think that what these regulations do is, again, it provides that planned phase approach for the private industry as well as public funds to know what we can anticipate is coming down the pike for vehicle sales. So as the number of electric vehicles on the road continues to increase in a manner that we have a general sense of how that'll look based off these regulations, that's when, industry, it's a clear sign to industry to help support that transition over time as well. So yes, I feel very strongly that, as the market continues to grow, the charging infrastructure will continue to grow with it. And we don't need a million chargers on the road tomorrow, but that can happen, as the market continues to increase. And not implying that New Mexico needs a million chargers, but just as a hyperbolic example of, the number of chargers that we might need and that we don't need to get to the goal by tomorrow.
I'll also add upon Kathy's response in that a big part of what these regulations do is send a market signal not only to charging infrastructure providers, but also to utilities that these electric vehicles are going to be coming to New Mexico. And so businesses who are making investment decisions in New Mexico who are interested in building out these charging stations look to see if these standards are in place, because it serves as a way to ensure it's a good business investment, knowing that these regulations are in place, knowing that the vehicles will be deploying on the roads. And so by having these regulations on the book, you're both helping the businesses invest in New Mexico, but you're also helping your utility plan at the same time for these vehicles as well. All of that contributes to an environment where charging infrastructure, as we indicated in the chart in the presentation, will continue to increase as the years go by.
Thanks, Guillermo. Aaron?
Yeah, I just wanted to add into those great points. The New Mexico Climate Action Plan meeting last night. Jerry Valdez was talking about just how successful their solicitations for fast charging have been, and how the rounds of applications continue to go out. And I think you see that reflected in the growth of fast chargers. That I think we had a slide that showed that how fast that's continued to be. And the work of the electric utilities, Public Service Company of New Mexico and El Paso Electric have been really, really impressive. And the growth of those plans has been considerable. And I think those plans will help to ensure that charging is accessible, not just in the home and not just the highway fast chargers that we talk so much about, but also, in multifamily housing, at commercial enterprises, and for businesses as well. So there's a lot going on. The standards are really important to show that direction, and there's a lot of other complementary policies happening at the same time.
Thank you all. All right, we've got a couple questions that I'm just going to answer real quickly. Yes, we are sending out the recording and the slide deck. So everybody that's on here, and also everybody that was invited that wasn't able to attend, will have those materials. Next question, I'm not sure who wants to answer this, but walk me through how a low to middle income New Mexican could get an EV and a charger at their home. Don't most New Mexicans charge from home?
I can try at that, and maybe folks can help out. So I think I guess, there are a lot of incentives available. I mean, the tax credits just passed, I think those in 2024. And then fortunately for customers living in PNM or El Paso Electric service territory, there are actually credits available from the utilities themselves that are only for low to moderate income individuals for the actual purchase of a vehicle. And that's in addition to the federal incentives, which are still available today. We'll see what happens, but all of those incentives today are available for low to moderate income customers. I think that's on the vehicle side. I know one challenge has been the availability of vehicles. We heard that come up a lot in the hearings. The availability of used EVs and new EVs that were within the reach of low to moderate income individuals. That's something that these standards will help with, creating a used vehicle market, and as well as increasing options in the new vehicle market. We actually had a used EV dealer testify during the motion to stay hearing just about how quickly his used EVs were coming off his lot. And then on the charging infrastructure side of things, a lot of electric utility incentives, all PNM, El Paso Electric, both have incentives that increase for income qualified customers to help them install charging infrastructure in their homes. And so there's a lot of policy support that is available to assist low to moderate income individuals with the purchase of that vehicle. And then once all that's in place, the savings, as were brought up in Kathy's slides, are going to be tremendously helpful for low to moderate income individuals. The savings on an annual basis from avoiding the gas station and avoiding those oil changes are going to help them to reduce the energy burden that they face on an annual basis.
Thank you, Erin. I am not one of the experts that are on this panel, but I'm just going to jump in and say I drive an EV, have for a while, and I very rarely charge in public. And so I do think that there is a lot to be said for not only the cost savings, but the ease of EV ownership in New Mexico. All right, next question from Representative. Thank you for being here. Have you heard any news on the 26 million that has been frozen by the federal government for charging stations?
Yes, thank you, Representative. I believe that this is in reference to the NEVI formula funding that came from the federal government that has been frozen. A couple of weeks ago, a group of 17 states, including New Mexico, announced their intention to sue to try to re-release some of that money. I'm happy to share with you, a couple articles that highlight that lawsuit. And I will flag too that NRDC, as well as a bunch of other environmental NGOs, recently intervened in that case to help support the states to unlock that funding again. So happy to provide you with any additional resources, but New Mexico included is looking into solutions to re-unlock that money.
Thanks, Kathy. All right, next, can you talk more about the Affordable Clean Cars Coalition that New Mexico joined with the U.S. Climate Alliance?
Yes, I can also touch on that. So yes, last Friday, 11 states, including New Mexico, joined this Affordable Clean Cars Coalition as part of the U.S. Climate Alliance, and Governor Lujan Grisham was part of that announcement. So, I think it's a really positive sign. Despite what's happening at the federal government, I think that what this shows is that state leaders are continuing to want to drive progress and are continuing to be kind of the drive forward as we see federal action or inaction continuing to occur in this space. So very welcome announcement, and I think really shows this commitment not only from New Mexico but from the other states that they want to continue to see progress being made. There's a couple of things within that announcement. One, still highlighting a commitment to the state goals of driving towards cleaner vehicles and helping to reduce emissions from the transportation sector, but also thinks about how we can make sure that this transition occurs to provide additional affordable vehicles for drivers and helps to really address something that we hear a lot, that owning a car today is very expensive, and relying on gasoline with its volatile gas prices continues to make vehicles more and more expensive to refuel. So shifting to cleaner zero emission vehicles helps to reduce the need for gasoline and those volatile prices, and also helps to provide lower fueling and maintenance costs as well, which helps to relieve that transportation energy burden. So I think there's still a lot of details that we need to hear about what exactly that coalition will ultimately look like. I know that they're looking to get input from a variety of different stakeholders on kind of what these future, standards or future policies and programs might look like. So I think stay tuned for more information, but I was, very happy to see the states kind of step up to the plate and show leadership in this transition to cleaner zero emission vehicles.
Thank you. All right, we've got a question. I might be interpreting this wrong, so I'm going to read it out exactly, and if anybody wants to jump in. How can this investment be legitimized when utility bills will rise? I assume we're talking about the investment in an EV. I will turn it to whoever would like to answer that.
I can start really quickly, Erin, and maybe you can talk on the
Kathy,
specifics.
I can follow up
okay.
too, and Erin, if you want
Okay.
to.
Sounds great. Again, in the follow-up materials, I'm happy to share with you some information, but there's been a variety of studies that have shown that actually having electric vehicles actually puts a downward pressure on utility rates. It does not increase utility rates at all. We've seen in the utilities that have the most number of zero-emission vehicles on their road and utilizing their grid, that actually we've seen consumer savings and utility savings costs as a result of having these EVs on utilizing the grid. And that's in part because a lot of the time that we charge electric vehicles, it's during the time when there's not peak loads, which actually helps to spread the costs of electricity, throughout the hours of peak and non-peak times. So it provides general benefits. And we've seen that across all 50 states as well, that there's a downward pressure on consumer rates. But Aaron or Guillermo, please chime in.
Yeah, and if that isn't quite clear or may not sound intuitive, it's because that kind of regardless of what happens throughout the day in terms of electricity demand, there's still a fixed price for operating the electricity grid. And so by charging your EV at times where these peak demands or these high electricity loads, like when people come back home from work and they're turning on their TVs and things, right? If you're charging later in the evening where there's not that same power draw on the grid, what it allows is for the utility to have revenue that would kind of offset that base cost of operating the grid. And what that does overall is put lower pressure on electricity rates and actually making it cheaper to actually operate the grid overall. So just to highlight that really key point. And there is, and this isn't like something that like, oh, this will be in the future. We've looked historically at what EVs have been contributing to the grid. And the research shows that it does put downward pressure and actually saves consumers on their electricity bills as a result of that dynamic I described before. But I'll turn to Aaron if you have anything you wanted to add.
No, I think that was well summarized by Kathy and Guillermo.
Thanks. And I just reread the question and it did say utility bills. So I'm just going to say real quickly in New Mexico, when I bought my first EV, my utility bill went up about $6 a month. But my spending on gas went down by about 100. And so for individual, if that was the question, your individual expenses are going to go down with an EV. There's no maintenance. There's no gas stations. There's no moving parts that have to be repaired pretty often, no oil changes, things like that. So just want to make sure that whichever way that question was meant to go. All right, one more question. Thanks, Julie, for this one. Given the federal administration, what are the top 3 priorities for New Mexico legislators to consider during this president's tenure? That's a big question. I'm going to turn it over to, I don't see any of you stepping up. So I'm going to go to Guillermo.
Yeah, I'll take this one because I'll talk about it from the trucks angle. When we're talking about many of these medium and heavy duty vehicles, we're talking about commercial vehicles, right? And many of these are conducting business not only in New Mexico, but also facilitating freight traffic all the way from California, cutting across the country through New Mexico, down to Texas. And so on this charging infrastructure point, that making sure that the deployment of charging infrastructure continues along these transportation corridors where a lot of goods movement is happening. So where a lot of goods are being transported across the country will help facilitate the electrification of these vehicles and allow for certainty for businesses when these fleets are making purchase decisions. They'll say, "Oh, look, New Mexico has been making investments on EV chargers to support electric trucking. That will last beyond this administration and will help not only facilitate goods movement and thus the economy in New Mexico, but will also clean up some of the dirtiest vehicles that are on the highways in New Mexico." And these long haul trucking situations that are cutting across multiple states are making those state investments in infrastructure to support that transition to electric trucks um, will pay dividends not only in terms of public health but in economic costs, as well as providing certainty to industries that are right now seeing the chaos and instability of the federal government and are looking for something, a little bit more concrete, clear visioned, and stable.
Thank you, Guillermo. I'm gonna jump in and say my top 3. I think that given the situation at the federal government, our number one priority in New Mexico for the coming, the next few years, number one is defending our advanced clean cars to advanced clean trucks and heavy duty omnibus rules. And within that, making sure that we maintain the authority of our EIB and the Albuquerque-Bernalillo County Air Quality Control Board to set these rules and other rules. And we saw a huge onslaught of bills that tried to negate those rules, but also negate the authority of those really important boards. And we need to stand strong against that. For me, that is number one. Number two, I think we all agree we have to finish the charging network, and we have to do all the things that we need to do to fund that. There's always supply chain issues and things like that, but we need to get those chargers statewide, so that we can say we've done that, and that is no longer a talking point against EVs. And then third, I think we need to incentivize EV use. We have a state tax credit for light duty vehicles. Given the situation at the federal front, we might want to consider raising that amount so that it can be more of an incentive. But also we need incentives for heavy duty vehicles. And so we've got some thoughts on how to move those things forward. So number one, defend what we have, defend our authorities. Two, charging station. Three, incentivizing EVs of all sizes and shapes. So, anybody want to add to that? Okay.
Well said, Tammy.
Okay. We've got a couple more questions and we're getting down to time, so I'm going to go quickly. The question is, in the Clear Horizons Act with limits on transportation emissions. Oh, Shelley, thank you. Yeah, so we will be seeing the Pro Tem's SB4 in some shape or form again. And that is important for climate in general. I was answering specifically about transportation, but for sure, SB4, great. Okay, we've got a couple more questions. I want to make sure we get through. I guess it would be Kathy. Can you talk more about how the flexibilities in the rule work?
Sure. And Aaron, please chime in on this. So there's also, I should say, there's flexibilities on the Advanced Clean Cars 2 side as well as on the Advanced Clean Truck side. So maybe we can all tag team this. But essentially, there are built into the regulations these flexibilities that help to actually lower the ultimate annual requirement. And I should note that one of those flexibilities is that automakers can carry deficits over three model years. So if they don't achieve the compliance in 1 year, they don't have to pay a penalty. They have multiple years to ramp that up or to achieve that compliance before paying a penalty. But some of these flexibilities include stuff that's actually happening right now, the option to start earning early action credits before the program even starts, as well as potentially, buying credits from other auto manufacturers or pooling them across different states as they might be. And there's also a provision in there to help support environmental justice communities by providing some additional flexibilities as well for lower MSRP vehicles and vehicles that are driving and helping support car sharing in EJ communities can also help to earn some flexibility. So there's some pretty specific ways that can do this, but what that ultimately just means in sum is that, what's on paper as the requirement is in actuality not what an auto manufacturer is required to produce or has to sell that exact number of vehicles. There's lots of flexibilities, as Aaron showed in his chart, that help us to achieve that on the Advanced Clean Cars 2 side. But Aaron, I don't know if you want to talk on anything more specific.
Yeah, I think that was a good summary. There's a lot of nuance there for sure. I think one thing I would just point out is that plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, which are the vehicles that have a battery pack that the car can operate entirely as a zero emission vehicle, or it can be it also has a gas tank for when the battery runs out. Those are allowed within the bounds of this rule. I think that's something that's been kind of unclear at times, but just wanted to flag that as well. And yeah, I guess on the flexibility side, Guillermo, if you want to share anything on the advanced clean trucks side.
Yeah, absolutely. What I'll highlight is I know we've kind of already talked about the credit trading system and the early action credits, but one thing that I'll highlight for ACT is that it sets different zero emission sales targets for different truck categories. So when we consider kind of these different vehicle classes, is everything from class 2B through 8. And so what it recognizes and how the rule was designed is that your smaller vehicles, for example, your delivery vans, cargo vans, those are expected to electrify faster, partly because right they operate on fixed routes, they go shorter distances, they can charge at depots overnight, and so what we're seeing is that those vehicles are electrifying. So those in general have higher electrification rates in the rule than, let's say, your class 8 semi truck that's going to be on the highway. That's a much bigger vehicle. It could be doing longer distances, and so the rule kind of caps out at a point that allows for the majority of vehicles actually to still be non zero emission vehicles, to account for the fact that technology still needs to improve in those segments. So even within the rule, there's an understanding that technology is advancing at different paces for different vehicle classes, and that's baked into the rule to really encourage a transition that's flexible. And then you combine that with the early action credits, you combine that with the ability to trade credits as well. All of these things kind of create a series of flexibilities that allow for the rule to be feasible and successful over the long term.
Thank you. And we have one more question on plug-in hybrids, but Aaron answered that one in the middle of that question. So I think that we are 2 minutes out. So I think we're going to wrap up here. I want to thank all the legislators and all the legislative staff for attending. We had a really big turnout today, and we're really thrilled by that. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to me via text or email. You all have both of those for me. And so, we'll get you information, whatever you need. And then I will also be sending out a recording link along with the slide deck. And I'll try to put in all the resources that Kathy and Guillermo and Aaron have talked about today in that email so that you'll have everything that we discussed today. And so I just want to close us out by saying, I think that these rules are incredibly important for New Mexico. I think that anything that you can get through a 50-plus-hour hearing and going into the weeds as far as we did in those 50-plus hours and get it on the books shows that it is an important thing for our state. And we really do hope that our legislative friends and allies will continue to support these rules, keep these in place for our state so that we can really move forward and reach our climate goals that are so important. So again, thank you so much for giving us an hour of your time today. Reach out with any questions. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank you
all.
all.